Nishishe? The words hung in the air like a challenge. Jiang Wei, one of China's most powerful tech billionaires, stood in the marble lobby of the Grand View Hotel, his expression unreadable as he watched the scene unfolding before him. The hotel manager, Richard Pemberton, had just attempted to greet him in what could only be described as butchered Mandarin, his pale face flushing red as he stumbled over the simple phrase for welcome. Behind him, a black woman in a housekeeping uniform stood perfectly still, her hands clasped around a cleaning cart, her eyes fixed on a point somewhere beyond the chaos. Her name tag read simply, Maya. The morning had started like any other at the Grandview Hotel. Maya had arrived at 5:30 a.m., 45 minutes before her shift, as she always did. She'd changed into her uniform in the basement locker room, the fluorescent lights flickering overhead as she pinned her hair back and prepared for another day of invisible labor. The other housekeepers barely looked up as she entered. After 3 years, she was just another face in the crowd of people who kept the luxury hotel running while remaining unseen by its wealthy guests. What they didn't know was that Maya held 2 master's degrees, one from Beijing University and another from Harvard. What they didn't know was that she spoke 7 languages fluently. What they didn't know was that she was here by choice, gathering material for an exposé that would shake the hospitality industry to its core. Richard Pemberton had been particularly insufferable that morning. He'd called an emergency staff meeting at 6 a.m., berating the housekeeping staff for taking too long to turn over the penthouse suites. "You people need to understand," he'd said, his eyes lingering on Maya and the other black and brown faces in the crowd, "that our Chinese investors expect perfection. They're arriving today, and I won't have any of your usual laziness reflecting poorly on this establishment." Maya had kept her expression neutral, even as Maria, standing beside her, had gripped her hand in silent solidarity. Pemberton had continued his tirade for another 15 minutes, throwing in casual remarks about knowing your place and being grateful for the opportunity. The irony wasn't lost on Maya that this man, who couldn't properly pronounce ni hao, was lecturing them about impressing Chinese dignitaries. The preparation for Jiang Wei's arrival had been nothing short of theatrical. Pemberton had spent weeks attempting to learn basic Mandarin phrases, practicing in his office with the door closed, his pronunciation so far off that even the Chinese-American sous chef had winced when overhearing him. He'd ordered the entire staff to memorize Chinese greetings, threatening termination for anyone who embarrassed the hotel. He'd even gone so far as to remove the Latino and black staff members from the front-of-house positions for the day, replacing them with what he called more presentable faces. Maya had been explicitly told to stay in the back areas, away from any guest interactions. "We need to project a certain image," Pemberton had said to her directly that morning, not even bothering to hide his meaning. But fate has a way of disrupting the best-laid plans of small minds. Jiang Wei had arrived 3 hours early, catching the entire hotel off guard. He'd walked through the front doors with just one assistant, dressed in a simple black suit that probably cost more than most people's cars, his presence commanding attention without effort. Pemberton had practically sprinted from his office, his practiced greeting already tumbling from his lips. Ni hao, Huan Ying." The words came out mangled, each syllable a fresh assault on the language. Jiang Wei's expression had shifted almost imperceptibly, a slight tightening around his eyes that spoke volumes to anyone paying attention. Maya had been pushing her cart through the lobby, having been called to clean up a coffee spill near the concierge desk. She'd tried to take a route that would keep her out of sight, but the universe had other plans. As Pemberton continued to stumble through his rehearsed phrases, Jiang Wei's assistant had suddenly spoken up in rapid Mandarin, asking a question about the hotel's acquisition history and its connection to certain offshore holdings. Pemberton's face had gone from red to white in seconds. He'd turned desperately to his assembled management team, none of whom spoke a word of Mandarin beyond what they'd memorized phonetically. The silence stretched uncomfortable and long. Jiang Wei's expression had shifted from mild annoyance to something closer to disdain. He'd said something to his assistant, who'd nodded and pulled out his phone, apparently ready to leave. That's when Maya had made her decision. 3 years of documentation, 3 years of recorded incidents, 3 years of watching good people be demeaned and diminished. It all crystallized in that moment. She'd stepped forward, leaving her cart behind, and spoken in perfect, Beijing-accented Mandarin. "Mr. Zhang, please allow me to translate. Mr. Pemberton is attempting to welcome you to the Grand View Hotel, though I believe there may have been some confusion in communication." The lobby had gone silent. Every head had turned to stare at Maya, the housemaid who'd just spoken fluent Mandarin with an accent that suggested years of high-level education. Jiang Wei's eyes had sharpened with interest. He'd responded in Mandarin, asking her directly about her background. Maya had answered smoothly, explaining that she'd studied at Beijing University for her undergraduate degree, spent 5 years working in Shanghai's financial district, and had recently been conducting research on labor practices in American luxury hotels. She'd kept her tone professional, conversational, as if it was the most natural thing in the world for a hotel maid to be fluent in multiple languages and hold advanced degrees. Pemberton's mouth had opened and closed several times, no sound emerging. His carefully constructed world, built on assumptions and prejudices, was crumbling in real time. Jiang Wei had asked Maya another question, this one about the hotel's treatment of its workers. Maya had glanced at Pemberton, then back at Jiang Wei, and made another choice. She'd answered honestly, in Mandarin, describing the systematic discrimination, the wage theft, the deliberate scheduling that kept workers from qualifying for benefits, the casual racism that permeated every level of management. She'd spoken for 5 minutes, her words flowing like water, while Pemberton stood frozen, understanding nothing, but knowing that something catastrophic was happening. Jiang Wei's assistant had started recording halfway through Maya's explanation. Other guests in the lobby had pulled out their phones as well, sensing that they were witnessing something significant. Maya had switched seamlessly between Mandarin, English, and even French when a curious guest had asked what was happening. She'd maintained perfect composure, professional even as she systematically dismantled the hotel's carefully maintained facade. When Jiang Wei had asked for specific examples, Maya had provided them, dates and times and names, all delivered in the same calm, educated tone that stood in stark contrast to her uniform. The revelation had spread through the hotel like wildfire. Within minutes, other staff members had begun to gather, drawn by the commotion. Some of them had started to speak up as well, emboldened by Maya's courage. Maria had stepped forward to describe how she'd been passed over for promotion 5 times, despite having more experience and better reviews than the white employees who'd been chosen instead. James from maintenance had talked about finding his time cards altered, hours missing, always just enough to keep him below full-time status. The stories had poured out, a flood of suppressed truth finally finding voice. Jiang Wei had listened to it all, his expression growing darker with each revelation. What Pemberton hadn't known was that Jiang Wei had built his fortune on principles of fair labor practices and employee ownership. His companies in China were known for their progressive policies, their profit-sharing programs, their emphasis on education and advancement for all workers. He'd been considering the Grandview Hotel as part of a major expansion into the American market. The discrimination and exploitation being described went against everything he stood for, everything his brand represented. Maya had pulled out her phone and showed Jiang Wei documentation she'd been collecting. Emails from Pemberton explicitly instructing managers to avoid hiring certain types for visible positions. Security footage of workers being forced to clock out and continue working unpaid. Audio recordings of management meetings where Latino workers were referred to as the help, and black employees were discussed in terms that would make any HR department cringe. She'd been methodical in her collection, careful in her documentation, preparing for exactly this moment or one like it. 3 years of patient observation, of swallowing insults and indignities, of watching her colleagues suffer while she gathered evidence. Jiang Wei had asked Maya directly why she was working as a maid if she had such impressive qualifications. Maya's answer had been simple and devastating. She'd applied for management positions at 15 hotels in the city. Despite her degrees, her language skills, her international experience, she'd only been offered housekeeping roles. The Grandview had been the worst offender, with Pemberton personally conducting her interview and telling her that she seemed better suited for behind-the-scenes work, despite her qualifications exceeding those of anyone else on his management team. She'd taken the job to document what she'd suspected was happening throughout the industry, planning to publish her findings in a major exposé. The assistant's recording had captured Pemberton's expression as understanding finally dawned. His face had cycled through shock, anger, fear, and finally a kind of desperate calculation as he'd tried to figure out how to salvage the situation. He'd attempted to speak, to explain, to justify, but Jiang Wei had held up a hand for silence. In perfect English, the billionaire had addressed the gathered crowd. He'd announced that his company would be withdrawing all interest in the Grandview Hotel effective immediately. Furthermore, he would be ensuring that every major investor in his network knew exactly why. He'd turned to Maya and offered her a position with his company, heading up their new diversity and compliance division for their Western operations, at a salary that had made several onlookers gasp. But Maya hadn't finished. She'd pulled out a folder from behind the concierge desk, where she'd hidden it that morning, knowing that today would be different. Inside were copies of her article, ready for publication in 3 major newspapers and 2 online platforms. The investigation went beyond just the Grandview, encompassing 12 major luxury hotels across the city, all of them showing similar patterns of discrimination and exploitation. She'd thanked Jiang Wei for his offer, but explained that she had already accepted a position as head of a new nonprofit focused on hospitality worker rights, funded by a coalition of progressive investors who'd been waiting for her investigation to be complete. The security footage from the lobby had been uploaded to social media before Pemberton could even think to have it deleted. Within an hour, the video had been viewed hundreds of thousands of times. The hashtag #MayaSpeaksTruth had started trending. News vans had begun arriving outside the hotel. Pemberton had retreated to his office, but the damage was done. The board of directors had called an emergency meeting. By that afternoon, his resignation had been announced, along with a promise of a full investigation into the hotel's employment practices. Maya had worked the rest of her shift, because that's what professionals do. She'd cleaned the rooms assigned to her, helped train a new employee, and even assisted with translation when 3 more Chinese investors had arrived, word having spread quickly through Jiang Wei's network about what had happened. Each of them had sought her out specifically, offering her business cards, job opportunities, partnership proposals. She'd accepted them all graciously, adding them to the network she'd been building for 3 years, a network that would fundamentally change how luxury hotels treated their workers. The epilogue had come 6 months later. The Grandview Hotel, under new management, and with Maya consulting on their restructuring, had become a model for inclusive employment practices. The housekeeping staff now included 3 members with advanced degrees who'd been promoted to management positions. The starting wage had increased by 40%. Maria was head of guest services. James ran the maintenance department. And Pemberton? He'd been spotted working at a car rental agency in the suburbs, his applications to other hotels mysteriously never making it past the initial screening, his name a cautionary tale whispered at hospitality conferences. Zhang Wei's new American venture had launched with Maya's nonprofit as a primary partner, ensuring that every hotel in their portfolio met strict standards for fair treatment and inclusive hiring. The lawsuit against the Grandview and 11 other hotels had resulted in a $50 million settlement, funding job training and education programs for hospitality workers across the country. Maya's investigation had won a Pulitzer Prize for investigative journalism, the first time such an honor had gone to someone who'd gone undercover as a service worker. But perhaps the most powerful change had come from the thousands of workers who'd been inspired by that moment in the lobby. Videos had poured in from hotels, restaurants, retail stores, all showing workers standing up to discrimination, demanding fair treatment, refusing to be invisible. Maya had become an icon, not because she'd sought fame, but because she'd chosen the perfect moment to speak truth to power. She'd shown that expertise and intelligence exist at every level of society, that the people serving coffee in cleaning rooms might just be the smartest ones in the building, and that underestimating someone based on their appearance or position is not just morally wrong, it's bad business. The Grandview Hotel lobby had been renovated after the incident. The marble replaced with warm wood. The cold minimalism transformed into something more welcoming. But they'd kept one thing: a plaque near the concierge desk, small but significant, with a quote in 7 languages. In English, it read, "Excellence has no uniform. Respect has no exceptions." Every new employee was told the story of the day a maid spoke perfect Mandarin and changed an industry. Every manager was reminded that the person pushing the cleaning cart might just be documenting their every word. Maya still visits the hotel occasionally, usually for meetings with the worker advocacy board she chairs. She walks through the same lobby where she once pushed a cleaning cart, now wearing designer suits bought with her consulting fees and book advances. But she always makes a point to stop and talk to the housekeeping staff, addressing them by name, asking about their families, their dreams, their plans. She knows what it's like to be invisible, to be underestimated, to be dismissed. And she's made it her life's work to ensure that no one else has to stay that way. The question remains for everyone who hears this story: how many brilliant minds are we overlooking because of our assumptions? How many Mayas are out there right now, pushing cleaning carts or serving food, their potential dismissed because of how they look or where they work? What would happen if we started seeing every person as fully human, fully capable, fully deserving of respect? The comment sections on the viral video were filled with similar stories, thousands of them, each one a reminder that dignity and intelligence aren't determined by job titles or uniforms. Would you have spoken up in that moment? Would you have risked everything to tell the truth? Or would you have stayed silent, keeping your head down, accepting the status quo? The choice Maya made that day wasn't just about language skills or hidden credentials. It was about recognizing the moment when silence becomes complicity, when personal comfort matters less than collective justice. She'd spent 3 years preparing for that moment, but when it came, it still required courage. The kind of courage that each of us has inside, waiting for the right moment to speak truth, to demand better, to refuse to be invisible any longer. The ripple effects had continued long after that day in the lobby. Zhang Wei had established an annual award in Maya's name, given to hospitality workers who demonstrated exceptional skill and dedication regardless of their position. The first recipient had been a janitor from Detroit who spoke 8 languages and had been using his breaks to teach English to newly arrived immigrants. The second had been a hotel laundry worker from Miami who developed a new system for reducing water waste that saved hotels millions while protecting the environment. Each award came with a full scholarship and a guaranteed management position, proving that talent exists at every level if you're willing to look for it. Pemberton's fall from grace had been complete and swift. The investigation into his practices had revealed years of systematic discrimination, wage theft, and harassment. Former employees had come forward with stories that made the board of directors' blood run cold, not from empathy, but from fear of lawsuits. He'd been banned from the hospitality industry entirely, his name becoming synonymous with the old way of doing business, the way that assumed some people were born to serve while others were born to lead. His wife had left him when the full extent of his behavior became public, taking their children and moving across the country. He'd tried to write a book about his experience, attempting to paint himself as a victim of cancel culture, but no publisher would touch it. The last anyone had heard, he was working night shifts at that car rental agency, serving customers who never knew they were being helped by a former hotel executive who'd once believed he was too important to treat workers with basic dignity. Maya's book, Invisible No More: 3 Years Undercover in America's Luxury Hotels, had become required reading in business schools across the country. She donated half the proceeds to fund legal services for hospitality workers facing discrimination. The other half had gone toward establishing training centers in underserved communities, places where people could learn not just the technical skills of hospitality, but also their rights as workers, their value as human beings. She'd insisted that each center include language training in Mandarin, Spanish, French, and Arabic, preparing workers for an increasingly global industry while sending a clear message that multilingual ability was an asset to be celebrated, not a characteristic to be hidden.